What's up guys, Intellitech Studios here, and today we'll be doing the full review on the Bissell Liftoff Revolution Pet. Now this particular machine I acquired at a thrift store for a relatively reasonable $15, and it didn't need a whole lot, but I did still strip it all the way down to the motor, clean it up, and give it the old sort of refurbishment. It's obviously still got a bunch of scratches and battle scars from use, and I had to scrounge apart a set of attachments, but it's fully good. Now, it does still have the original pre-motor filter and upper tank filter, but the post-motor filter I did replace with a brand new one. It's got a brand new HEPA filter and has all the attachments with it except the turbo brush in this model. So this machine is pretty common these days. You can find a good amount of these on the used market. They are no longer in production when it comes to new units, and this entire body style of liftoff has been completely deprecated by Bissell. There's a newer version that's entirely separate. I actually reviewed that version a number of months ago. There's a powerlifter version and a clean view version. I reviewed the powerlifter version, but they're identical to each other. This is the older style that originally first came out in 2004, based off of the bagless Bissell Cleanview that had come out 2 years prior to it. It replaced the bagged Bissell Liftoff, which originally was introduced as the Bissell Plus in the early to mid 90s. So this platform has been around for a number of years, and in the late 2000s to early 2010s was copied by other brands like Sebo and Shark. Bissell, of course, did it first, and in many cases they did it right. But we'll see how they did it on this unit. So starting off, it's very much a Bissell Cleanview bagless, or a Cleanview PowerTrack Revolution more so, but configured into a liftoff design. You've got a more upgraded machine with some newer modern features. So right off the bat, you've got a brush roll shutoff switch, so that way you can use the vacuum on bare floors. It automatically shuts off the brush roll in upright mode, just like a lot of more expensive machines. And it has the grab and go liftoff canister, which I'll demonstrate in a sec. Now, one thing about the liftoff canister is that the actual unit does sort of get in the way if you're trying to use the cord clip, as that right there is on the main unit. But if you don't use the cord clip, the entire cord actually does store on the pod, so you can store it and carry the entire pod with you. The idea is if you want to carry it out to vacuum your car or some other thing that you don't need the main unit for, you're just going to be using the tools, you can do that. The only real problem is that while on the main pod you've got the suction hose, all the attachments are stored on board the body unit, and I'll demonstrate that in a sec. To do the liftoff portion, you've got this big yellow button. You press it with your fingers, and you pull the entire thing straight out the front. And as you can see right here, we've got the main unit with the main suction motor, all the ductwork, and the hose, but as you can see, no attachments. So the attachments actually store on the body. So on the body, we've got a combination tool, and this tool is pretty decent. It's definitely one that a lot of people don't seem to like. It's very common on Bissell products, but I find that it is fairly effective. I don't usually use the upholstery side very much. I often use the dusting brush side for just about everything, but you can swivel it into either direction. These bristles aren't great for dusting soft surfaces that are more delicate, but for things that you're not worried about scratching and for couches and picking up pet hair, it works pretty decently. And it's got a little slot on the inside that you can insert the crevice tool to get even more reach. And that snaps on right there. You can swivel it to either side. Next, we've got a crevice tool. Not much to say about that. It's a tool that gets into crevices. And we've got a telescopic extension wand. So it starts off at this length, but you can give it the old twist, which is hard to do with only one hand free, but you can twist it, and that allows you to extend it, and then twist it again to lock it into place. So that works pretty well. And then any attachment you want to attach goes into the larger end, and like I mentioned before, you can actually put the dusting brush / upholstery tool on the end of the crevice tool in the slot that it fits into, and that gets you a good amount of reach. Although in my case the wand untelescoped itself, so I'll have to manually do that, which is really difficult with one hand. But once we get it, we can see we've got a fair amount of reach. So you can get up into a good amount of spaces, and the hose is decently stretchy. I'll demonstrate that in a sec, but in the meantime my cat is trying to attack it for some reason, so I'll just brush him real quick and that should fix that problem. There we go. Okay, he objects now. To access the hose, you've got a little piece of tan plastic right here that you can use to pull the hose out. And there's a little hook that it stores on and a little clip that it clamps into. And here's your hose. There's not really much of a handle or anything to grab it with, but that's pretty much that. Flop. When we have both the extension wand and the crevice tool and the combination tool extended, we actually have a fair amount of reach. This hose oh, and of course that just undid itself. This hose actually has a fair amount of stretch, but it is still relatively high mounted, so it can pull itself down. Oh, sorry. And as a result, tip over. So it's not as crazy as something like a Dyson. And of course the wand wants to act up and unlock itself when I'm trying to do it one-handed. But when I actually do it with two hands, it's easy enough to lock into place. And it can get all the way up into corners. It can get the tops of door frames and all that. And it can do that with relative ease. So it's definitely possible for this thing to get a good amount of reach. As far as reaching up your stairs, it really isn't quite enough, but it's really close. You know, if you had a landing in between your staircase, you could definitely get up the stairs with this without having to remove it from the lift-off pod. But of course the idea is you use the pod so that way you still have a stretch hose, so it's not pulling you back, but that way it also has the ability for you to not carry the entire machine with you. So this hose stretches a really good fair amount, and if you really stretch it out, you could make it up your stairs, but comfortably it makes sense just to use the lift-off portion instead. But you have the option of doing both. This vacuum does have a fairly wide brush roller, and one of the weird things about this machine is that despite the fact that I have a lot of other Bissell vacuums that don't struggle with hair tangling, for some reason this one does. Not sure why that is, but just like every other Bissell, it's a few screws just to access the brush roll and change the belt. And the belt is different than a lot of other Bissell uprights, but I will link that in the description. That does need change periodically, though not quite as often as on one of the cheaper uprights. We also have on this particular model 7 height adjustment positions, and since you have the ability to turn off the brush roller, the bare floor setting actually does make sense. Although, if you have it that low, bigger objects can't pass through. We've got a headlight right here to illuminate the way. We've got the pre-motor filter right here. We've got the lock and seal lever. Twist it to the left to lower the bin in order to be able to remove it, and twist it to the right to tighten it. We've got our bin right here with our Revolution side panels, which these are actually surprisingly effective and do a great job at keeping the filter at least not as dirty as it oh so typically gets with the original Cleanview styles of machines. This particular machine definitely gets a lot of improvements in that regard because it just doesn't clog up as quickly. The Revolution pieces actually make a big difference. Now, of course, this machine is a more straightforward bagless design, so there is no cyclone, there is really nothing to effectively separate the dust, but these Revolution side panels actually make a very, very big difference in terms of the way that this pre-motor filter handles dust, because in previous generations, every time you vacuum, you'd have to clean this filter. Every single time, even if you didn't fill the bin. This case, you can actually wait until you fill the bin all the way to the fill line, or at least a few times of using it and emptying it before you have to clean this filter. And this filter right here, you can twist it down, but it's easier to access it if you remove the entire assembly. So you take this little gray knob, or it could be yellow on your model, and twist it counterclockwise. And that allows you to remove this entire top panel. There's also a clean filter indicator, although it's not very sensitive, so it's likely not going to help you out much. You can give this bottom section a counterclockwise twist and pull it out, and there's your filter. As you can see, there is a lot of debris that cakes on it, so I would recommend checking this every time you empty the bin, especially because this can definitely impede your airflow. I will link replacement filters for all three of the filters on this machine in the description. There's the first one I showed you on the back, the one I showed you right here, and this one. All three filters do need replaced. This filter and this filter you can wash, but of course this one doesn't need it as often as this one. So this one I recommend washing every single time you empty the bin. And this one I recommend washing about every 3 months. Potentially every month if you're in a really dirty environment. And that rear HEPA filter I recommend replacing every year. And when you replace the HEPA filter, I recommend replacing these ones too, because they only wash out so many times before they begin to fall apart. They are inexpensive, but there is a lot of maintenance you have to do with this machine, and if you neglect it, it will likely pass a lot of dirt through the motor, or simply eventually clog up and stop picking things up. So you gotta babysit it a little bit. That's one of the disadvantages of these older bagless designs, but it still is a big improvement from the original liftoff bagless that did not have the Revolution side panels, and it's also better, believe it or not, than the multi-cyclonic version of this, because that one is nearly identical, just with two different plastic pieces instead of a filter in here. And as a result, this filter just loads up with junk as opposed to this filter. It's actually not any better of a setup. So this is my favorite of the three designs, as this is at least tolerable. Now it is an open cup design, so definitely don't buy this machine if you have allergies, because even carrying this outside to empty it can cause dust to blow in your face. And I recommend these side panels get cleaned out every once in a while. That can also cause dust to get in your face. So unlike some other bagless vacuums where you could get away with emptying it outside, this one, if you have bad allergies, I just straight up wouldn't buy it, because it's not a sealed system. It leaks out a lot of dust, and it's just simply not a great vacuum. This is not a vacuum you buy because you want good filtration. It's definitely something you can get by with. There's a lot of other Bissell designs that are much worse in terms of filters, but this is definitely cutting it pretty close. I don't mind this design so much because I'm used to this after so many years, and because it's such a big improvement over the CleanView and CleanView 2 designs and the PowerForce bagless and all that, but it's still not great. It's better. It's a lot better. These make a big difference, but it's not great. And by the way, these little bits do slide out if you want to wash out this entire bin. It's pretty easy to do. But again, that slides right back in, just like that. You want to make sure it's lined up, then you slide that, and that closes right up. So we discussed filtration, we discussed the tools, and there's a few other things to discuss about this machine as well. Now I showed you the brush roll. We'll talk about cleaning performance, because while this machine definitely doesn't filter very well, it performs excellently in terms of extracting debris out of carpets. I don't think it's as good as the more simple machines, mainly because the wide cleaning path on this specific unit struggles a little bit. I don't think that's its fault. I think the brush roll is just worn out, but it definitely does good enough that I can tell it'd be better with a stronger brush roll. This one just isn't the best example of that. Now that I think about it, I probably should have shoved another brush roll in here to see how well it does. For some reason I never thought about that, but I'll update the description if I discover any different results. But the clean performance is excellent, because I'm pretty sure the discrepancy is just the brush roll having worn out bristles, because I do notice that when I put it on a lower setting, it performs great. So I think this one just needs a brush roll. It's the same wide path brush roll as many other Bissells, so it's easy enough to find a replacement, although you might struggle to find one that color matches, as they're all black now. But it cleans really well, it grooms really well, it has the dual edge cleaning. It's not that great of edge cleaning. It's very similar to this exact base design. It's very similar to the PowerTrack Revolution and the CleanView PowerTracks and the PowerGlide Platinum and all that stuff. The older wide path Bissell base is pretty typical. It's okay at edge cleaning, but it's not great. But agitation is excellent, and it does a great job at deep cleaning carpets. So that is really good. And since it's on a separate motor, you don't have to worry as much about burning out belts. although I still don't recommend actually sucking up anything you're not supposed to, as you still could burn out a belt. It doesn't have as intricate of a protection system as other machines. It's more so for the convenience, less so the protection. So this machine definitely excels at cleaning performance, and I mean that's all there is to it. It's a Bissell. It cleans great, but it filters poorly. So if you're concerned with keeping your carpets clean, it will do all that just fine. Now, one of the big selling points of this machine is the fact that it has a brush roll shutoff for bare floors. So you would naturally think, oh, so this would be a big upgrade if you have a Bissell without a brush roll shutoff, right? And the answer is kind of. Yes, it no longer scatters debris because you can turn off the brush roll, but it doesn't seal very well. And it really struggles to pick up anything but the finest debris. If you're trying to pick up little bits of cat food or anything like that, anything that you'd reasonably spill on a kitchen floor, it's going to struggle with it. And even fine debris, it's not really going to do great unless you happen to be right in the sweet spot where the actual intake is. It doesn't disperse the airflow very well on bare floors, so it's really not a great performer on bare floors. The good news is that you don't have to worry about it damaging your floors like you do with the more cheaper Bissells where the brush roll doesn't shut off. But just like those machines, you're really much better off getting a bare floor attachment, which you can use the Kenmore and Panasonic and Dyson ones, and that will make cleaning bare floors a lot more easy. You can use the Dyson Articulating Hard Floor tool and the Dyson Flat Out tool. They work just fine on this machine, and you know the Panasonic and Kenmore versions as well. You can use all those bare floor brushes, as Bissell, to my knowledge, doesn't offer one anymore. And that should be an acceptable solution, considering you don't have to worry about parking the vacuum on the bare floor because it does shut off. But as far as actually using the base to clean bare floors, it's not great. It's good that you can shut it off, but it still isn't clearly designed to seal or clean well on bare floors, and it definitely shows. It'll get by in a pinch, but don't expect it to do a great job. Finally, we're going to talk about weight. The entire complete unit, if you put it on a scale, which it doesn't exactly sit very flush, but we can let this thing weigh itself and see precisely what it weighs. This machine, as you can see, weighs 20 pounds. And that specifically is without the cord on, but all the attachments and otherwise what you would expect it to be while you're using it. So it's a pretty hefty machine. If you're just using the liftoff portion, you are going to save a good amount of pounds. In fact, for whatever reason, it doesn't even trigger the scale, even though it is a good number of pounds. Why it doesn't trigger, I don't know. So it's really hard for me to actually measure how much this liftoff pod weighs, because my scale, for whatever reason, does not like it. But it is, if I had to guesstimate, it's probably closer to about 10 pounds. But I could be wrong. It feels kind of heavy to me, but if the scale doesn't pick it up, it must not be that heavy. But I think it's just the way that it's balanced. Unfortunately, the actual floor nozzle by itself also does not trigger my scale, so we're not able to do any subtraction to get the weight for each individual piece that way. So unfortunately, based on my exact testing, I'm not able to report the weight of individual pieces by themselves, only the complete unit. Sorry about that. Though I don't believe you exactly need to be a crazy hyper smart scientist to figure out that the bulk of the weight will come from the main setter pod, not the skeleton frame with the brush roll motor in it. So if I had to guesstimate, I would guess the main liftoff pod is at least 12 pounds, but it's probably more than that, considering the entire assembled unit is 20. But obviously, if you're using it in liftoff mode, the idea is that you carry it by this handle, so the weight is a little bit more evenly distributed. And when it's on the machine, that also functions as your main carrying handle for the entire unit as well. The actual mechanism does appear to be fairly strong, and it obviously hasn't broken on this unit yet. So the final thing to talk about with this machine is to not talk and use it. So we'll give it a quick run on this carpet. Now, this exact machine has a weird bug where when you recline it, which is with this big black pedal back here, it slides back just fine, but when you push it up, it actually snaps in at like halfway up, which is quite strange. So, and I'll demonstrate that right now. Very weird, but it still holds in just fine. So I was concerned about it being faulty, but it appears to just be weird. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and give this a run. One other little tidbit that I forgot to notice before we end this, it has the same standard 12 amp Bissell motor that a lot of Bissells from this era had, as it was made in Korea. Some of the newer ones are made in China. And also, while this machine is very heavy when you're actually carrying it, in a similar way that a lot of the other lightweight Bissells are when you're using it, it's actually very lightweight. There's not a lot of weight on the handle, despite the fact that you would think that there'd be a lot more weight on it as a result of the pod. Unlike a lot of Shark machines, and even more expensive machines like the Cibo, Dart, and Felix, the weight is actually managed on this very, very well to the point where it doesn't feel top heavy at all. And out of all the liftoff machines, whether you compare the newer Bissell liftoff machines, the Cibo liftoff machines like the Dart and Felix, and any of the Shark Navigator liftaway series, especially the bigger ones that are this size and weight, and even the ones that are significantly less, this handles the best out of all of them in terms of weight whenever you're actually pushing, pulling, and maneuvering the machine around. And that's especially impressive considering there's no swivel neck. So, in that regard, this machine is great. And if handleability, and if you want a lift off machine, that or a lift away machine, whatever you want to call it, I mean, technically this came first, so we'll call it a lift off machine. If you want a lift off machine that has the best handling in terms of weight in the hand as you're vacuuming, this is hands down the one to pick. Now, obviously, they don't make them anymore, so you're going to have to hunt for one. But if you can find one, that is a great selling point of this exact machine. Now, filters are easy to find, brush holes are easy to find, replenishment parts and tools you'll be able to find just fine. Actual replacement parts, if things break on this machine, that's a different story. That's a little bit more up in the air. So that is the one disadvantage to using a machine that's not currently available and sold, is it might not have as much after sales support, especially when you compare it to something like a Felix or a Dart. But those machines are also in an incredibly different price class than this, so it's not really fair to compare the two. So that being said, I do really enjoy this machine. And coincidentally, there is, another sort of easy to use, well, actually it's not really. I was going to start comparing it to this, but there really is no comparison. They're entirely different apples. It's not even apples and oranges, it's peaches and asparagus. But for some reason in my brain, I thought, why do I compare the two? Maybe you guys want to see that, even though it doesn't make any sense. But this machine is definitely one that I really like, and a quick rundown of the features at the end. Clean performance on carpets is excellent. Clean performance on bare floors is so-so. It's definitely passable, but it really isn't. I mean, it can pick up stuff, but it's not great. I would not get this for bare floors. Carpets, it's much stronger at. Tools are surprisingly strong for a Bissell. It does have a good amount of reach, both with the hose and the extensions. And while the upholstery and combination tool is definitely not a super strong shoot, it's better than a lot of other machines that have similar combo tools. Filtration, as usual, is abysmal and is not a selling point of this machine, but if you keep the filters clean and deal with the relatively high maintenance, it is capable of lasting a long time with its current filter setup. You also have the fact that it is very heavy, but it's very versatile. It can do a lot of different surfaces, and it can definitely clean your house top to bottom if you so desire that, and as long as filtration is not a deal breaker for you. It has a decent cord, 30 feet, exactly what I'd expect in this price range. Not too short, but not too long. A nice sweet spot for the price range. And of course, the entire machine is built in the same way that Bissells are, where if you take care of it, it'll definitely last a really long time. It's not the kind of thing you can throw it off the roof, but if you drop it down the stairs, it might not break, but your mileage may vary. So, this machine overall gets a recommendation from me if you can find one in decent shape. That's the only problem right there. It's more so a collector's piece. If you're a normal consumer watching this and you're somehow made it to the end, well, first off, thank you. That's really impressive considering how rambly I am. But if you can find one of these in decent shape, it might be worth slapping a new brush roll belt and some filters in and cleaning up and using if you don't value filtration. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you can put up with it, if you can put up with the maintenance for it and the fact that it's not a sealed system and it's bagless, then maybe. But really, a bagged unit would definitely be better. But of course, there aren't much of those nowadays. I'd say maybe look at the Kenmore Intuition. That could be a great option. I haven't reviewed that machine yet, though, so I'm not endorsing or recommending it, but it is an option that does exist. There is a bagged version of that machine and a bagless version as well. It's kind of a similar layout to the Sharks, but hopefully not as bad, because I definitely don't recommend anything Shark these days for numerous reasons. Maybe the original MB352, but even that's kind of stretching it. So your options these days for a cheap machine of this style is pretty limited, even from Bissell themselves, as their newer machines I don't think are as good as this older unit, all things considered. But the newer versions of this Liftoff are an option, but they are, of course, completely different. And I'll link any replacement parts that I find for this machine in the description. Anyways, this is Inteltech Studio signing out my full, in-depth, long-term review of the Bissell Liftoff Revolution Pet. I've enjoyed it. It's been in my vacuum rotation, so I clearly don't hate it too much, as I've used it a good number of times. I used it to clean my bedroom, used it to clean the living room a few times, haven't used it on the stairs yet. But, like I said, I'll report back with any additional things I discover as time goes on in the description. Anyways, Inteltech Studio signing out. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you all have a good one. Peace. Let me know your thoughts on this vacuum and its various offshoots in the comments below, and what your thoughts are on just this machine in general. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you all have a good one. Peace.